Most new gardeners share a nearly identical first experience. You bring home a healthy, vibrant plant, set it on the counter, and within days, it inexplicably turns yellow and dies. The immediate reaction to this is almost always self-blame. You assume you're simply missing the genetic trait required to keep things alive, the elusive green thumb. Gardening operates as a biological system, where success is a function of timing and structure, rather than innate talent or level of passion. We treat gardening as a spontaneous weekend hobby, something we do when the mood strikes. A living biological system doesn't care about your weekend schedule. Look at this graph measuring time against a plant's health and your enthusiasm. We can use this to compare the standard emotional approach to gardening against a rigid checklist-based strategy. The spontaneous approach looks like this. You make massive upfront emotional and financial investments at the garden center, but because there's no ongoing structure, the trajectory crashes the moment the first unexpected problem arises. The checklist approach is entirely different. It starts with lower initial excitement, but demands small, consistent inputs that yield steady, long-term survival. To see if the mental investment required for that steady line is actually worth the return on investment for a busy hobbyist, we need to evaluate 4 specific garden checklists, because getting a garden to actually thrive requires trading the fantasy of impulsive planting for the predictability of an input-output routine. Phase 1 of this system starts before any money is spent or seeds even touch the dirt. This ledger tracks our 4 checklists. The pre-planting inputs are purely observational. You have to audit the exact sunlight hours a specific spot gets across a full day and test the soil drainage by physically squeezing a handful to see how it holds shape. The expected outcome is basic alignment. You match the biological needs of the plant with the physical reality of the environment. The psychological trade-off is delaying gratification. You can't just buy the prettiest plant right away. But if you ignore this audit and stick a sun-loving tomato plant in a spot that only gets bright light in the morning and sits in shade all afternoon, it will fail. Resolving these light and soil requirements early prevents the environmental mismatches that cause the vast majority of early plant deaths. Once the seeds are in the ground and the initial excitement fades, we enter phase 2. Beginners typically default to occasional, heavy weekend labor. The system, however, demands a brief 10-minute weekly routine. Here in the ledger, the weekly rhythm tasks are specific. You check soil moisture a few centimeters down where the roots actually live, and you remove weeds while they are still tiny. This gives you early detection. You catch nutrient deficiencies and pest issues while they take seconds to fix, rather than fighting established problems later. The strict trade-off here is letting go of the planted and forget it fantasy. It requires absolute consistency. The biological rule governing this phase is that consistency beats intensity. Stable, frequent watering is far superior to occasionally flooding a dry bed. The ROI of this weekly rhythm is the direct exchange of intense, exhausting physical labor for calm, predictable observation. Even with perfect planning and weekly routines, phase 3 is inevitable. Unexpected issues like yellowing leaves or pests will eventually surface. The standard reaction to these visual anomalies is to panic. Beginners try to fix it by dumping excess water or fertilizer on the plant, which usually finishes it off. The problem-solving protocol requires isolating the symptom, identifying a single recent change in the environment, and making only one small adjustment at a time. This prevents panic treating, but it requires immense patience. You have to endure looking at an ugly, struggling plant for days while you wait to see the results of your minor adjustment. Finally, we reach phase 4, the mandatory actions at the very end of the growing cycle. The seasonal reset requires clearing out dead, disease-carrying debris, refreshing the soil with compost, and deliberately logging the year's successes and failures. The compounding outcome here is year-over-year success. You are ensuring a higher baseline of soil health and eradicating overwintering pests for the following spring. The brutal trade-off is that you have to do this manual labor and reflection precisely when you are most exhausted at the end of the season. But by following these 2 final checklists, gardening stops being a repetitive, starting-from-scratch nightmare and becomes a compounding system of continuous improvement. If we step back from the tactics, the underlying philosophy is clear. Gardening is a test of managing biological variables, not a spiritual connection to the earth. This chart breaks down who should adopt this highly structured approach. The first ideal user is the overwhelmed beginner. If you have a history of killing plants and carry guilt about it, this structure is for you. The second ideal user is the time-poor hobbyist who wants maximum yield with minimum weekend hours and significantly less decision fatigue. Conversely, avoid this system if you value your gardens strictly as a space for spontaneous creative play. If you are financially unbothered by replacing dead plants and simply enjoy the physical act of playing in the dirt, the rigidity of these checklists will feel suffocating. It is also important to remember that these checklists cannot perform the physical labor for you. You still have to do the work. Embracing this structure won't stop the weather or the pests, but it ensures your effort is directed toward the right variables at the exact right time, making healthy growth a matter of routine rather than luck.